Hi there, it's Billy Tarasio from Modern Law. And we decided that yesterday we would kick off a series on domestic violence. If you don't follow us on TikTok or Instagram, go ahead and shoot over there because we're doing little snippets and daily updates. But here on YouTube, I want to talk to you about the most horrendous case of domestic violence that I ever worked on. And the interesting thing about this particular case is it did not involve physical abuse of my client, but it was still domestic violence. And I think that that's what Gabby Petito's case is really, I think that that's what we can take away from what has happened to Gabby Petito, is that there are warning signs and there are ways that our partners can be abusive that we should know about before it escalates to a point of physical violence. So let me tell you about the case. I got a call from a mother who said, Billy, I need a lawyer. I just extracted my daughter from the home where she has been kidnapped and held hostage for the last 2 years. Now, when I get that type of call, it's usually like, really? Really? But I wanted to know more, and I met with her and I met with her daughter, and it was real. So the daughter was the client, and she was 22 years old. And when she was 19 years old, she had responded to an ad looking for a nanny in Phoenix. So she moved from her town at 19 up in the Pacific Northwest to Phoenix to be a nanny for a family. And the family was a little different. Papa was the dad. There was a mom, Maria, and there was another lady. I don't remember her name, but let's call her Raquel, who was in the house. And my client wasn't really sure what Raquel's role was, but you had Maria and you had Papa, and she came down to be the nanny. They had a bunch of kids, 2 teenage boys all the way down to babies. And when she got there, she was showered with attention and affection from Papa and from the women. They literally gave her gifts that were wrapped. There were parties. It was this wonderful, amazing, warm family environment, and very, very different from the one that she had grown up in. She had grown up with a single mom who worked very hard, but wasn't as affectionate. And my client, let's call her Melissa, she was desperate for affection, attention, belonging, warmth. She was 19 years old, but they had a lot of parties at home, and she was given alcohol. And one day when she was suitably drunk, Papa invited her into his bedroom where he proceeded to have sex with her. She didn't dispute. She didn't say no. She went along with it. And very quickly, she became part of his harem. And he would rotate bedrooms with the 3 women in the house. The women and the 2 teenage boys would go out and work each day on ice cream trucks, make money, come home, and very quickly she was isolated from absolutely everyone. All of the money was joint and communal. He controlled absolutely everything. He never hit her. He never hit her. She was a compliant, obedient woman, young woman, who wanted to please Papa and loved him and wrote love letters to him and talked about taking his last name. And they were in a sort of polygamist type relationship, but it wasn't a relationship. Papa was a con man. Papa was 45. She was 19. And he had a history that was a mile long. My client, Melissa, was not the first woman he had done this to. And one day, Melissa got up the courage. Her mother had gone to this house. She had stood outside. She had begged for Melissa to leave. She'd called the police. The police had come. The police said, listen, she's an adult. She can do what she wants. The mother, who had initially called me, could not extract her daughter. But one day Melissa called my client or her mother and said, I want to go home. Can you get me out of here? She'd had a baby. Her baby was 1. And for whatever reason, she was done being the property of Papa. So her mother picked her up. They drove across the country. In the meantime, by the time they contacted me, Papa had filed an emergency petition to establish paternity and to bring the child back. I got called and hired days before the emergency hearing was to occur. My client was out of town. Since then, she had gotten an order of protection from another state against him. But when we showed up at the hearing, I didn't have much to go on. And typically when a mother flees the state and a father files to have them brought back, typically they're brought back. So I showed up in court and argued that my client was a victim of domestic violence, even though she had never been hit, even though she was never tied up, even though nothing was keeping her prisoner with Papa except the coercive control that he exhibited over her. And he was a dangerous, dangerous man. He beat his teen boys if they stole candy. He reigned with terror. And he and Maria, the longest wife, he did beat Maria. He beat Maria in front of her to the point where Maria peed. There was domestic violence in the house. It just wasn't directed at my client or her daughter. So after an impassioned plea to the judge that he not order my client to come back, that there was significant issues here that need to be investigated, I remember the judge telling me to like calm down, like just slow my roll. And I was a new attorney. So this was a long time ago. This was roughly 10 years ago. I was a newer attorney. This was one of my first, very difficult cases, certainly one of the first very difficult cases. And the judge at least knew that I was concerned enough so that he needed to do some investigation because this story was so crazy. So he did not order my client to come back right away. He appointed a best interest attorney for the child, and he appointed a court-appointed advisor to investigate the situation. And then we did our job of investigation. We found his criminal record, which included a murder from when he was 17 years old. And we found a slew of women who he had done this to and then kicked out. In fact, one of the babies at the house he was in didn't belong to any of the mothers or him. He had kidnapped this child from another mother, a runaway, a homeless girl who he had picked up on the streets when he used to do hot dog stands, and joined into his little cult. This was a long-standing issue, and the abuse that he committed in front of my client against Maria and Raquel and the 2 teenage boys was pretty awful. By the time we got to a final hearing, we'd done a lot of investigation. We brought the mother of the child who was in the house, in Papa's house, even though he wasn't the dad. We brought her to testify as to her experience. We deposed Papa. We questioned Maria on the stand about significant, specific acts of domestic violence, like when he threw her from the car. And the judge understood that this was a very, very dangerous man and ordered that my client have sole legal decision-making and ordered that he only have FaceTime communications. Eventually that all stopped, and my client has not seen him, to my knowledge, in the last 10 years. This is a really interesting case to think about because of how domestic violence presents itself. And there is no one size fits all. The thing that is consistent is control, power, fear, intimidation, abuse of authority, power imbalance. And these are all things that we need to be aware of and we need to talk about. So I know that I have taken this opportunity to talk to my 2 teenage boys about Gabby Petito's case, about domestic violence, about control, about healthy relationships. It's a conversation that we should all be having nationally. And if you have a case with domestic violence, many people think that the court doesn't care about domestic violence. That's not true. The statute that we used in the case that I was talking about is specific to domestic violence and child abuse. It's not one of the general 25403 best interest factors in family court. It's a separate statute, 25403.03, and it talks specifically about domestic violence and child abuse. Look at it. It's your friend. Use it. And if you're in a situation, or if you have family members in a situation, know that there is hope, that it doesn't always happen like it did for my client, where she's had zero contact with this man and she's been able to move on with her life, but it is possible. So have a little bit of faith, and make sure to follow us for the series on domestic violence.